My 5th wedding anniversary was coming up, and my wife, Sarah, had been acting, well, mysterious. She'd always been the planner in our relationship, the one who orchestrated surprises and made special occasions feel truly special. So, when she started whispering on the phone and sneaking glances at her laptop screen when I wasn't looking, I figured she was cooking up something big. I'm not usually one for grand gestures myself. A quiet dinner at our favorite Italian place, maybe a thoughtful gift, that's more my speed. But Sarah loved the whole production of surprises. And honestly, seeing her so excited about something always made me happy too. We lived in a quiet suburb of Chicago, a place with tree-lined streets and friendly neighbors. I worked as a software engineer, a pretty standard 9-to-5 gig that I mostly enjoyed. Sarah was a freelance graphic designer, working from our cozy home office. Life was good, comfortable, predictable in a way that I appreciated. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our comfortable silences. Or at least I thought we did. Leading up to the anniversary, Sarah kept dropping hints, vague enough to keep me guessing but enticing enough to build anticipation. "Pack a bag," she'd say with a sly smile. "You'll need something for warm weather." Warm weather in October in Chicago? My mind immediately jumped to a tropical getaway. Maybe Hawaii? We'd always talked about going there. Or perhaps somewhere in the Caribbean. I tried to pry more information out of her, but she was a vault, just giggling and telling me to be patient. Her family, on the other hand, was a bit more involved. Sarah had a younger sister, Emily, who was her complete opposite. Where Sarah was bubbly and outgoing, Emily was reserved and often seemed a bit judgmental. Their parents, David and Susan, were nice enough, though Susan could be a little overbearing at times, always wanting to know every detail of our lives. They lived about an hour away, and we usually saw them every couple of weeks for Sunday dinner. A few days before our anniversary, Sarah told me her parents wanted to take us out for a celebratory dinner. "Just a casual thing," she said, but I noticed she seemed a little more nervous than usual. We went to a fancy steakhouse downtown, the kind of place where the waiters wear tuxedos and the prices make your eyes water. David and Susan were unusually quiet, and Emily, who had joined us, kept looking at Sarah with this strange, almost pitying expression. I tried to make conversation, asking about their work and Emily's latest art projects, but the atmosphere felt off. Later that night, after we got home, I asked Sarah if everything was okay. "Yeah, why wouldn't it be?" she replied a little too quickly. "They're just being them." I shrugged it off. Maybe I was just overthinking things. The anniversary was in 2 days, and I was probably just getting anxious about whatever surprise Sarah had planned. The day before our anniversary, Sarah was unusually busy on her phone. She kept texting and making calls, often stepping out onto the porch to talk in private. I tried not to be nosy, but it was hard not to notice. When I asked her who she was talking to, she'd just say it was work stuff or a friend. Finally, the big day arrived. Sarah woke me up with a kiss and a huge grin. "Happy anniversary, honey," she chirped, handing me a beautifully wrapped gift. Inside was a brand new travel backpack, a really nice one with all sorts of compartments and features. "Get dressed in something comfortable," she instructed. "Our flight leaves in a few hours." Flight? So it was a trip. My excitement started to build. I quickly showered and got dressed, throwing a few essentials into the new backpack. Sarah was already downstairs, looking radiant in a light sundress. Her suitcase was by the door, and I noticed a smaller carry-on bag next to it that I didn't recognize. "Ready?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. "Absolutely," I replied, grabbing my jacket. The drive to O'Hare International Airport was filled with anticipation. Sarah kept humming to herself and occasionally squeezing my hand. I tried to guess our destination, throwing out a few possibilities. Hawaii, maybe Mexico? But she just smiled knowingly and shook her head. When we arrived at the airport, Sarah checked us in and handed me my boarding pass. I glanced at it, and my heart skipped a beat. Honolulu, Hawaii. She'd actually done it. I turned to her, ready to shower her with thank yous and anniversary kisses. But she was already walking ahead, pulling her suitcase. We went through security and made our way to our gate. It was still about an hour before boarding, so we found some seats near the window. Sarah seemed a little restless, constantly checking her phone. Everything okay? I asked. Yeah, just waiting to hear from Emily, she said, her gaze fixed on her screen. She said she might swing by to say goodbye before our flight. Emily? That was a surprise. Emily wasn't exactly the sentimental type. But okay, maybe she was making an effort for our anniversary. A few minutes later, I saw Emily walking towards us. She looked serious. Not her usual slightly annoyed expression, but genuinely concerned. Hey, Sarah said, standing up to hug her sister. Emily gave her a quick, almost awkward hug, then turned to me. Hey, Daniel. Her voice sounded strained. Hey, Emily. What's up? I asked, a little uneasy. Emily didn't say anything. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a white envelope. She held it out to me, her eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. What's this? I asked, taking the envelope. Felt heavy, official. Just open it, Emily said quietly, avoiding my gaze. I looked at Sarah, who was watching the exchange with a strange mixture of anxiety and something else, something I couldn't quite place. With a growing sense of dread, I tore open the envelope. Inside were several sheets of paper, neatly stacked. The top sheet had bold, official-looking lettering, divorce agreement. My blood ran cold. I stared at the words, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Divorce? From Sarah? But why? We were going to Hawaii. It was our anniversary. I looked up at Sarah, my heart pounding in my chest. Her face was pale, her eyes glistening with tears. But there was also a strange resolve in her expression, a coldness I had never seen before. Sarah, what is this? I managed to stammer, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't answer. Instead, Emily reached into her bag again and pulled out another envelope, this one smaller and addressed to me. And this is for you too, Daniel. I took the second envelope, my hands trembling. Inside was a single airline ticket. My name was on it, along with the destination, Chicago. One way. My mind was reeling. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not like this. I looked from Sarah to Emily, desperately searching for an explanation, a sign that this was some kind of horrible misunderstanding. Daniel, Sarah finally said, her voice flat, devoid of any emotion. It's over. I'm leaving. Leaving? But where were we going? Hawaii? Our anniversary trip? The trip? It was never for us, she said, her gaze drifting away. It was for someone else. Someone else? My stomach churned. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Who? I asked, the word catching in my throat. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She took a deep breath, then looked at me, her eyes hard. His name is Mark. I've been seeing him for a while now. Mark? I didn't know any Mark. Or maybe I did. Maybe it was that guy from her book club, the one she'd mentioned a few times. But, Sarah? Cheating on me? After 5 years? I know this is a shock, Emily interjected, her voice softer now. But Sarah hasn't been happy for a long time. Not happy, I repeated, my voice rising. What are you talking about? We were happy. I thought we were happy. Sarah finally met my gaze, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, regret? Guilt? It was gone as quickly as it appeared. You weren't paying attention, Daniel, she said coldly. You were always so focused on your work, your routines. You never really saw me. That stung. It wasn't entirely untrue. I did have my routines, my comfort zones. But I loved Sarah. I thought I showed her that. Maybe I hadn't been as attentive as I should have been. But this was a complete blindside. And your family? I asked, my voice shaking. They knew about this? The dinner the other night? Emily nodded slowly. They tried to talk her out of it, Daniel. Honestly, they did. But Sarah made up her mind. I looked at Sarah, my heart breaking into a million pieces. Her parents had tried to stop her, and she still went through with this? On our anniversary? At the airport? So, the surprise trip to Hawaii? I began, the words laced with sarcasm. It was a cover, Sarah said, her voice barely audible. A way to get away without raising suspicion. Mark is meeting me there. My head was spinning. Betrayal. Deception. Felt like something out of a bad movie. I looked down at the divorce papers in my hand, the words blurring through the tears that were now welling up in my eyes. So what? You just expect me to sign these and go home? I asked, my voice filled with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Your flight leaves in an hour, Sarah said, glancing at her watch. Emily will take you back to the house. Your things are already packed. Packed? She'd already packed my things? Like I was some unwanted package to be shipped back? I stood up, my legs feeling weak. I looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and for the first time I saw a stranger. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had loved for 5 years, was gone. In her place stood someone cold, someone calculating, someone who was willing to inflict this kind of pain on me without a second thought. I looked at Emily, who was watching me with a sad, sympathetic expression. She seemed genuinely sorry for what was happening. Come on, Daniel, she said softly, placing a hand on my arm. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, my throat too tight for words. I turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing there at the gate, her suitcase beside her, ready to start her new life with someone else. As Emily led me through the crowded airport, I felt numb. It was like I was watching my own life unfold from a distance. A tragic play where I was the unsuspecting fool. We walked in silence to the baggage claim, where Emily helped me retrieve my suitcase, the one Sarah had packed for me, filled with clothes for a tropical vacation I would never take. The drive back home was a blur. Emily tried to make conversation, offering words of comfort, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. My mind was still stuck on Sarah's cold words, her casual betrayal. How could she do this? How could she plan this elaborate charade, pretending everything was fine, right up until the moment she handed me those papers? When we arrived at our house, it felt strange, unfamiliar. It was still filled with our things, our memories, but it no longer felt like home. Emily helped me carry my suitcase inside. On the kitchen counter, I saw a note with my name on it. It was from Sarah. Daniel? It read in her familiar handwriting, which now felt like a cruel mockery. I'm sorry it had to be this way. I've left the divorce papers on the dining table. Please sign them and send them to my lawyer. I've also closed our joint bank account and transferred your share to a new account in your name. The details are enclosed. I wish you all the best. All the best? After what she'd just done. The audacity of it took my breath away. I crumpled the note in my fist and threw it in the trash. Emily stayed with me for a while, making sure I was okay. She told me that Sarah had been unhappy for a long time, that she felt like we'd grown apart. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had been too focused on my own world to see what was happening. But still, this felt so calculated, so cruel. As the evening wore on, the reality of the situation started to sink in. My wife was gone. My marriage was over. And it had all ended in the most humiliating way possible, at an airport on our anniversary, with a one-way ticket back to a life that had suddenly been turned upside down. I felt a surge of anger, followed by a wave of despair. How could I have been so blind? So stupid? I thought we had something real, something lasting. But it was all a lie. Later that night, after Emily had left, I found myself standing in the living room, staring at the framed photos on the mantelpiece. Pictures of Sarah and me, smiling, happy, in love, felt like a lifetime ago. I picked up one of the photos, a picture from our wedding day, and stared at Sarah's smiling face. A tear rolled down my cheek. You'll regret this, Sarah, I whispered to the empty room. You'll regret what you've done. And in that moment, amidst the pain and confusion, a seed of resolve began to grow within me. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't let Sarah's betrayal define me. I would pick myself up, dust myself off, and somehow, someway I would rebuild my life. And maybe, just maybe, I'd even find a way to make her regret the day she handed me those divorce papers at the airport. The thought gave me a small, bitter sense of satisfaction. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next few days were a blur of shock, anger, and a deep, gnawing sadness. I barely slept, replaying every moment of our relationship in my head, searching for clues I'd missed, red flags I'd ignored. The divorce papers sat on the dining table, a stark white testament to the sudden and brutal end of my marriage. I hadn't touched them. Part of me wanted to rip them up, pretend this wasn't happening. But another part, the rational part, knew that Sarah was gone, and clinging to a dead dream would only prolong the pain. Emily was a rock. She checked in on me constantly, brought over food, and just listened without judgment as I ranted and raved about Sarah's betrayal. Even her parents called, expressing their shock and disappointment in Sarah's actions. Apparently, their attempts to dissuade her had been more forceful than Emily had let on. They were genuinely upset about how Sarah had handled things, and their support, though unexpected, was a small comfort. I spent hours staring out the window, watching the leaves fall from the trees, mirroring the way my life had suddenly fallen apart. I thought about calling my own family, my parents and my sister, but I wasn't ready to face their questions, their sympathy. I needed more time to process everything myself. Then, a few days later, while I was aimlessly scrolling through social media, a masochistic habit I'd picked up, hoping to find some clue, some explanation for Sarah's behavior, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. It was a photo posted by a mutual friend from a wedding in Hawaii. And there, in the background, unmistakable, was Sarah. She was standing with a man I didn't recognize, and she was laughing, her arm linked with his. The caption read, "Congratulations to Mark and Sarah. Wishing you a lifetime of happiness. Mark and Sarah. Married? Already? Just days after handing me divorce papers at the airport?" The sheer audacity of it was staggering. It wasn't just an affair. It was a whole other life she had been living. A life she had meticulously hidden from me. The surprise anniversary trip wasn't a cover for a secret getaway. It was the getaway, just not with me. A wave of fury washed over me, so intense it felt like I might explode. I wanted to call Sarah, to scream at her, to demand an explanation. But what was the point? She had made her choice. She had moved on. And now it was time for me to do the same. I looked at the divorce papers on the table. They no longer felt like a symbol of defeat, but an opportunity. An opportunity to finally close this chapter of my life and start a new one. I picked up a pen and, with a steady hand, I signed my name on the dotted line. But as I sealed the envelope to send to Sarah's lawyer, a different kind of resolve began to form in my mind. Sarah thought she could just walk away, leaving me with nothing but a broken heart and a pile of legal documents. She thought she could erase 5 years of our life together with a single, calculated act of betrayal. She thought wrong. I remembered the coldness in her eyes at the airport, the way she had dismissed our entire relationship as if it meant nothing. And I remembered her words, "You weren't paying attention, Daniel. You were always so focused on your work, your routines. You never really saw me." Maybe she was right about some of that. I had my routines, my comfort zones. But it wasn't because I didn't care. It was because I felt secure in our relationship. I trusted her. I never imagined she was capable of such deceit. But now I was paying attention. And what I saw was a woman who had not only betrayed me but had also underestimated me. She thought I would just lick my wounds and move on. She didn't know me very well after all. I started thinking about the past 5 years, the life we had built together. We had shared everything, our hopes, our dreams, our finances. We had bought this house together, built a life here. Did she really think she could just take off to Hawaii with her new husband and leave me with nothing? I pulled out my laptop and started doing some research. I looked up the laws regarding divorce in Illinois, focusing on the division of assets. We didn't have any children, which simplified things, but we did have significant joint assets, the house, our savings, our retirement accounts. Sarah's note mentioned transferring my share of the bank account, but what about everything else? The more I researched, the more determined I became. I wasn't going to let Sarah walk away with everything while I was left picking up the pieces. I deserved a fair settlement, and I was going to fight for it. I contacted a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Evans, who came highly recommended. I told her everything that had happened, showing her Sarah's note and the divorce papers. She listened intently, her expression growing increasingly serious as I recounted the details of Sarah's sudden departure and her immediate marriage to another man. "Mr. Miller," she said after I had finished, "this is a clear case of adultery which can certainly play a role in the division of assets in Illinois. Furthermore, the way your wife orchestrated this, the deception involved, it suggests a level of premeditation that we can certainly use to our advantage." Her words were like a balm to my wounded ego. It felt good to know that someone was on my side, that Sarah's actions wouldn't go unchallenged. Over the next few weeks, Ms. Evans and her team worked tirelessly, gathering financial records, researching property values, and building a case. I provided them with every detail I could remember about our finances, about Sarah's behavior leading up to her departure, even about the wedding photo I had found online. Meanwhile, I started to focus on myself. I reconnected with old friends, people I hadn't seen much of while I was married. I took up some old hobbies I had neglected, things that brought me joy and helped to take my mind off Sarah. I even started going to the gym regularly, channeling my anger and frustration into something productive. The legal process was slow and often frustrating, but Ms. Evans kept me informed every step of the way. She filed a response to Sarah's divorce petition, outlining my counterclaims and demanding a fair division of our assets. Sarah's lawyer, a slick, expensive-looking man, initially tried to intimidate us, arguing that Sarah was entitled to a larger share of the assets due to her emotional distress. But Ms. Evans was having none of it. She presented a strong case, highlighting Sarah's calculated deception and her immediate remarriage as evidence of her lack of good faith. As the legal battle dragged on, I started to hear whispers through mutual acquaintances. Apparently, Sarah's whirlwind romance with Mark wasn't exactly the fairy tale she had probably envisioned. There were rumors of arguments, financial disagreements, and a growing tension between them. It seemed that the foundation of their relationship, built on lies and betrayal, wasn't as solid as they had hoped. A small part of me felt a sense of vindication at this news, but mostly, I just felt tired of the whole thing. I wanted it to be over so I could finally move on with my life. Finally, after months of legal wrangling, we reached a settlement. It wasn't exactly everything I had hoped for, but it was fair. I would keep the house, and Sarah would receive a portion of our savings and retirement accounts. It was enough for me to feel like justice had been served, that Sarah hadn't gotten away with everything scot-free. The day the divorce was finalized, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was relief that the ordeal was finally over, but there was also a lingering sadness, a sense of loss for the future we had once planned together. That evening, I decided to do something I had been putting off for months. I called my parents. I told them everything that had happened, from Sarah's mysterious behavior to the divorce papers at the airport to her quickie wedding in Hawaii. They were shocked and heartbroken for me, offering their unwavering support. "We'll come visit you next weekend, son," my dad said. "We'll help you get things sorted out." Just knowing that I had their love and support made me feel a little lighter, a little more hopeful about the future. A few weeks later, I was at home, unpacking some boxes that had been in the attic for years. I stumbled upon a box filled with old photos, pictures from our first dates, our engagement, our wedding, our early years together. I sat down on the floor and started flipping through them, a bittersweet smile on my face. There were so many happy memories, so many moments of genuine love and connection. It was hard to reconcile the woman in those photos with the cold, calculating person Sarah had become. As I reached the bottom of the box, I found a small, leather-bound journal. It was Sarah's. I hesitated for a moment, feeling like I was intruding on her privacy. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened the journal and started to read. The early entries were filled with the typical musings of a young woman in love, her excitement about our relationship, her hopes for the future. But as I read further, the tone started to change. Sarah began to express feelings of dissatisfaction, of feeling unheard and unappreciated. She wrote about feeling like I was more in love with my work than with her, that I wasn't paying enough attention to her needs. My heart sank as I read her words. Maybe she was right. Maybe I hadn't been the perfect husband. Maybe I had taken her for granted. But still, did that justify the way she had ended things? The deceit, the betrayal, the public humiliation? As I continued reading, I reached the final entry, written just a few days before our anniversary. The words were cold and clinical, outlining her plan to leave me, to marry Mark in Hawaii. There was no remorse, no sadness, just a cold, calculated determination. I closed the journal, a heavy weight in my chest. It didn't excuse her actions, but it did give me a glimpse into her state of mind, her reasons, however flawed, for what she had done. I put the journal back in the box, a sense of closure washing over me. I would never fully understand Sarah's choices, but I didn't need to anymore. I had my own life to rebuild, my own future to focus on. I stood up, feeling a newfound sense of strength. I walked over to the mantelpiece and looked at the framed photos, not with sadness anymore, but with a quiet sense of acceptance. Those memories were a part of my past, but they didn't define my future. I took down the photo from our wedding day, the one I had whispered to months ago. I turned it over, and on the back, I wrote 2 words, "I'm free." Then, I put the photo back on the mantelpiece, a small reminder of the journey I had been on. I had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and uncertainty, but I had also found strength, resilience, and a renewed sense of self. The surprise anniversary trip to Hawaii had ended with divorce papers at the airport. It was a brutal and humiliating end to a chapter of my life, but it was also the beginning of a new one, and this time I was in control of the destination.